pirates walking into this sacred space and arrogating to ourselves manipulative capacity that God never ordained us to have.
Hmm. And then wondering why we're sick.
Yeah, and then wondering
Yeah.
why we're sick, or why it doesn't work, or why this plant is more susceptible to frost, or more susceptible to bugs, or more, or doesn't have nutrient density in it. Any number of things.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking, "Oh my gosh, the Salatins are doing it, but could we do it?" So I want to assure the listeners that there's a huge opportunity here for anybody who wants to just start small and
Yes.
have their own little regenerative farm. So Joel, talk about that because you mentioned at the conference that many of the current farmers are aging out.
Welcome to Vitality Made Simple. The following production is for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you need medical advice, call your doctor. Now, let's go to Vitality Made Simple.
Well, welcome to Vitality Made Simple. This is the podcast that equips you to feel better, look better, and to enjoy better relationships. Life is all about relationships. It's relationships that make us super happy or make us super sad. And it is my joy today to introduce you to the most famous farmer in the world. This is Joel Salatin. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Debbie. It's a real honor and a privilege to be with you.
Well, you're so kind. I want to give you a brief introduction of Joel. Mike and I met him at a Christian based health conference in Wooster, Ohio. He was the keynote speaker. He did 5 presentations. Oh my gosh, he is a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. You may know Joel as the lunatic farmer. He has an incredible command of the English language and a wonderful sense of humor and is an epic storyteller. So Joel, you take the floor. All the books you've written, it was so hard to decide. But I think I want to kind of talk about this guinea pig culture that we live in. Tell us about that.
Well, I kind of articulated it in my book, Folks, This Ain't Normal. I did a lot of, I had a spate there several years ago of just doing a lot of college lectures, these endowed lecture circuits, in colleges. And the more I spent in college culture, I realized how myopic, how these young people think that the way things are, it's always been. I mean, they'd never seen a manual typewriter. They didn't know how to dial, roller a dial telephone. They couldn't imagine, obviously, a time before the internet when you actually sent letters and you made phone calls, and when you actually, cooked from scratch. There was no Lunchables, there was no Hot Pockets. In fact, I can remember when you couldn't even buy boneless, skinless breast from the supermarket and chicken. You had to buy a whole chicken, take it home, take a knife and cut it up. And so this as I started thinking about all the things that are going on now with, children with no chores, children considered a liability instead of an asset because there's nothing to do around the house except go to the basement and sit on screen time. The idea, the whole animal anthropomorphism movement that, my cat is my aunt, is my dog is a cow, where you have a moral equivalency between animals and humans, and just all this stuff is is very abnormal from a historical perspective. We are in a little time blip, here, experimenting with a lot of philosophies and things that humankind has never even had a chance to even think about, before now. And so, yeah, we are the, we're being vaccinated, medicated, fast fooded. you know, it's, television, celebrity, sports entertained, and it's just incredible. I think the change. I just, in fact, I just took a trip, do a lot of trips, and take books to read, and I just read 2 years before the Mast. It's one of the Harvard classics from 1835 to 36, and it was a worldwide bestseller in the 1840 when it came out. And oh my goodness, it's so good to just read a historical tale that's nonfiction. 2 days, this guy was a sailor in 1835 to 36, and what a difference that was when all those guys sat around the ship and they made up songs and had to entertain themselves, and nobody was looking at a screen, and just amazing times.
I can remember being on my parents' farm as a kid, and there were no toys, no TV. We would make these towns in the dirt, and so we would have rocks be the houses and sticks. And I remember that creativity, Joel. It
Yeah,
I I'm sure it really built brain cells that we don't build now, and everything's done for us as far as the little kids go.
that's right. And when you look at our epidemic of teen suicide, the mental health issues, and you look at these people that go in and school shootings. Every one of these young people who participates in a school shooting, when they get, if they survive, they get interviewed, and every one of them says, I was bullied, I never fit in, I never, nobody liked me, whatever. And every one of them is suffering from terrible self-image and self-worth. And I believe, Debbie, that, and I'm not a child psychologist or anything like that, but as an old geezer farmer now who spends a lot of time, we run a formal apprentice and stewardship program. So I'm surrounded by 18 to 28-year olds, lots of them all the time. And I'm convinced that self-worth comes from successfully accomplishing meaningful tasks. All four words are important. Successfully accomplishing meaningful tasks. And so you have to successfully accomplish, but it has to be a meaningful task, not a trivial task, not a make work, not a screen thing. It's a meaningful task. How do you build something? How do you tear apart an engine? How do you shine up a spark plug? How do you sharpen a knife? How do you split wood, chop, can green beans, weed the corn? These are things that kids grew up doing, throughout history. And the most important human need is the need to be needed.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
and what a terrible thing now that we have reports showing the cost of raising a child. My goodness, it, it's a cultural indictment that we are so uncreative that we have made child rearing a liability rather than an asset. And people who know me know I'm big on eight to 11 years old. Kids ought to have their own business, and there's tons of things kids can do as a little entrepreneurial business. I mean, obviously the classic lemonade stand, but I mean they used to deliver papers, they used to pick apples, they used to chop wood and milk the cow and all this stuff. And today, I mean, there's everything from dog sitting to lawn mowing and all sorts of things. And 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 feeling needed, like the world needs what I can offer, is probably the best mental health antidote there is. And
Absolutely, absolutely, Joel. And also the the knowing that you need to make money. I mean, as a little kid, we had a long lawn mowing business early, and we had to make our own money. We could never ask mom and dad for $5 to go to the movie, and that's
right.
so good for kids.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You know, this entitlement culture, which then also it acts symbiotically with the impatience culture. So you you link up entitlement with impatience, and boy, you have a real recipe for literally
Mm.
for depression, because everything doesn't happen all the time, and it isn't effortless. Life is not easy, and it's not fair, and and you have to enjoy the slog. And I think that we've done a great disservice. I think we've actually abused our kids these days by by acting like all the adult interface realities that they used to do is some sort of child abuse, some sort of child abuse. No, it's actually child abuse to take that all that away and not let them do anything. When we started our apprenticeship program many years ago, 30 years ago, we took 16-year-olds. 16-year-old that really wants to do something, there's no reason why they can't. But then we had to stop because they said that a 16-year-old until you were 18, considered an adult, you couldn't operate a cordless drill. And at 16, you can drive 3,000 pounds of steel down the interstate at 70 miles an hour, but perish the thought that you could actually handle a cordless drill to put a screw in a deck board. And this is the insanity that we've come. And so kids, unfortunately, who could be very productive and be developing self-worth and talent and what do I like to do, what do I don't like to do, what am I good at, what am I not good at, all those things get delayed, and you become an adult before you're needed. And that's a terrible thing.
It really is. And I think you do such a fantastic job of including the emotional aspect of all of this with depression. We in your presentations you talked about the microbiome, and we forget that we're created as body, soul, and spirit. So we have to address all three of those in order to live a balanced life. We have to have our faith, we have to have a healthy body, and then in terms of soul, our mind, will, and emotions, and they all impact each other. And the food we eat is so impactful for mind, will, and emotions. You talked a lot about the microbiome at the conference. So how important it is to keep our bugs happy. Expand on that, Joel.
Well, if you look at any microbiome guru today, and there's now more and more of them every day that are studying the microbiome, because yes, exactly, you're right. We're finding out that physical universe of bugs in the microbiome is a direct conduit to functionality, to mental and emotional functionality. And interestingly, every single person who is in this space, the one, I mean, there, of course, there's disagreements among them, but the one thing that every single one of them is in agreement on is that the single biggest dysfunctionality of the microbiome is not whether the food was organic or not, or whether it was grown locally or not, or even whether you got it from Walmart or not. It is how much diversity is in the microbiome. How do you get this diversity in there? And so when you eat a very limited kind of food and sterile food,
Yeah.
when I go pull a carrot out of the garden, I just kind of wipe it off on my pants and eat it, and I get a little bit of dirt, and that adds a tremendous amount of microbiome possibility. Interestingly, there's an outfit called the Food Bionutrient Association, and they have been studying. They started with carrots and they went to broccoli, and now they're doing beef. And so they're studying 150 nutrients in beef, and they're asking the question, what determines the most nutrient dense beef, the most balanced nutrients dense beef. And it's interesting, what they found is has nothing to do with breed, season, climate, age, any of that. The number one determinant of of nutrient adequacy in beef is how many different kinds of plants did the animal eat. And I mean, that is really profound. And what they're finding is that there's a huge difference between like 1 and 14. And once you go to 14 and above 14, it doesn't change very much. So, it's not like they've got to eat 100 different plants,
Yeah.
but at least something more than corn, you know. And so as we have simplified, I mean, if you look at I've spent a lot of time in Australia, and the Aboriginal culture of Australia, they routinely ate something like 1,500 different things. The
Whoa.
the average American only eats about 20 different things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, and vegetables, you got tomatoes, peppers, potato,
Potatoes.
yeah, yeah, lettuce, okay. I mean, onions maybe. I don't know, but there's like nine that are the key ones,
Hmm.
and that's about it. There's not much. And if you look at like Dolly Madison or Martha Washington's, they've got cookbooks. You can buy them at Montpelier. I'm here in Virginia, so we got all
Uh-huh.
this American history here, and you can buy these old cookbooks from these colonial, matriarchs, and half of the stuff in there we've never heard
Yeah.
of. Well, why? Because when there wasn't a Walmart, they had to have for example, berries or some type of fruit on their farms that came in, early in April and came in, different one every 3 weeks throughout the whole season, clear until November. And then hopefully they'd have something that would keep well, like a good old York apple or something, that keep in the root cellar, through the winter. But that's the way they kept their fresh seasonal succession going. Currants and June berries and all sorts of things. And we look at that. What in the world is that? We've never heard of this stuff before. And so they actually ate with much, much more variety than we do.
Well, and they had such a different variety of nutrients in each one of those things. I mean,
Right.
what's in a fig is totally different than in a date. I mean, things that are pretty similar. And so, they're feeding that microbiome like you mentioned. It's really funny. Last night, Joel, our daughter called. They have a big garden and their beets are coming in. So she's like, "Mama, I need a recipe for borscht." Well, years ago, she and I went on a mission trip to Russia and started making borscht. And so I started looking up recipes, and it's just exactly as you described, Joel. There's a variety of recipes. They all are based on seasonality, the particular area of probably where they lived in Russia, what they could get. So many of the ingredients in that cookbook, I had no idea what they were.
Right. Right. It's completely foreign. And yet that is the secret to our own microbiome is this huge diversity. So, that includes being grown in a very diverse soil environment, which is not done when you have, for example, aquaponics or hydroponics. And now, we're the only country in the world that certifies organic soilless produce,
Mm,
strawberries from
right.
Driscoll's and stuff. Most all that is all hydroponic, which means it's not even grown in soil, which means it doesn't
Yeah.
benefit from the worms and the azotobacter and the mycorrhizae and the actinomycetes and the gibberellins and all this soil microbiota. It's not there, and so it can't be in the plant, can't get in your microbiome. So you and I then we end up with a very simplistic microbiome, and something comes in, tries to invade us from outside, and we don't have enough different kinds of troops,
Right.
soldiers, if you will, to handle the creative onslaughts from outside.
Well, and then add to that, Joel, the antibiotics that are in conventionally raised meat. Tell our listeners what the labeling means on conventionally raised meats or beef that they buy, for example.
Well, uh, natural doesn't mean anything. Natural just means it's beef and not beef and kangaroo. Okay. Uh, so natural doesn't mean anything. Most organic is raised in a feedlot. The and most people don't realize that way over 50% of all the antibiotics, all the pharmaceuticals used in America, way over 50% of them are, or over 50% are used in livestock. So here we have people, using drugs all the time, prescription and over the counter, whatever. But then we're sitting down to eat, and we're eating drugs for dinner as well.
Yeah.
And so your dosage goes way, way up. And we all know that antibiotics actually kill a lot of the microbiome,
Yeah.
which is why there's probiotics. So if you do need antibiotics for an infection or something, then you want to, as soon as your regimen is done, you want to take some probiotic to build up
Yeah.
your microbiome. But yeah, right now the labeling on beef is really crazy because right now you can import Australian and New Zealand and Colombian and Paraguayan meat, and all you have to do is repackage it in the U.S. and it's stamped with country of U.S., a
Mm.
product of USA. And so there are a lot of people trying to get that changed. But yeah, there's nothing like knowing your farmer, know your food, building a relationship with your producer, and doesn't have to be local. We ship nationwide. It can be somebody that doesn't live near you. But I'm always a champion of trying to buy from somebody near you that you can go visit and look in the eye and have a relationship with. And people are always asking, well, why can't we get your stuff at Walmart or Kroger's or HEB or Piggly Wiggly? And my answer is, well, why do you go to Piggly Wiggly and Walmart? Don't buy your groceries there. Buy them elsewhere.
Yes, you've totally changed what kind of beef Mike and I eat. We buy from a regenerative farmer who uses your exact method. I want to also clarify something for our listeners that you mentioned at the conference. If it says grass fed, then that can mean that, or grass finished, correct me, Joel. If it says grass finished, that can mean the cow had one blade of grass, right? It's
Uh,
pretty meaningless.
Normally, you were right the first time. Grass fed means it can have had just one blade of grass in its life, and they consider that grass fed. Grass finished generally means that it is finished on grass, that it's not grain fed. So grass finished is the kind of thing you're looking for, not
Okay.
not grass fed. Generally, grass fed simply means they were. I mean, most beef is grass fed up until they go to the feedlot and start eating grain. I mean, some cows are certainly corn fed, before then. But generally, a calf is out on pasture on grass with his mama until weaning, and
Yeah.
then when they go to a feedlot. So grass finished is actually what you're looking for if you're looking for a label. But for ours, we don't even put anything on our label because it is so subject to craziness. So we just use our reputation to explain what we do, and we have an open door. Anybody can come and visit at any time to see what we do, and we have a 24/7 365 open door policy. Anyone can come from anywhere in the world to see anything, anytime, anywhere, unannounced. That's our commitment.
It's incredible, and we're planning a trip with our daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter next summer. It's going to be so much fun to visit Polyface. Tell our listeners exactly what rotational grazing means, how that looks on your farm.
Okay, so yeah, rotational grazing is essentially a mimicry of what we see in nature. So let me back up a little bit. When grass grows, forage, your lawn, when grass grows, it grows in a sigmoid curve. It starts slow and then it grows real fast, and then it slows down as it goes into senescence and makes a seed head and all that. And so the whole idea of grazing management is that rather than allowing the animal to eat, to prune, we call it pruning, rather than allowing them to prune that biomass, that vegetable material, the grass, at that first little swoop, when it starts to speed up. No, wait till after that speed up, that fast growth period, and then graze it. What you do then is the grass can go into third and fourth gear. It can actually grow fast
Yeah.
relative to time. And so most people, as you know, don't move their cows around. They just put them in a pasture and leave them. And so what happens is every time that grass gets up to that little starts to accelerate, it becomes long enough to graze. And so the animal comes and eats it again. And so that over time, that weakens the grass because it never really gets to energy, to positive energy. It's always behind, trying to catch up. It never gets out of first gear. And so the whole idea of rotational grazing is by using electric fence, um, which so there's some little bit of technology here, using electric fence and monitoring the grass instead of just turning the cows out on a field, letting them be there all the time in what we call continuous grazing, where they weaken the good stuff and let all the weeds grow because they don't like them. Instead, we mob stock. We confine the herd into 1 day's worth of paddock. Imagine it, one day's plate full of food, okay? And then using electric fence, we move them every day to a fresh plate of food, a fresh paddock every day. That's the rotation, okay? And by doing that, the cows eat a much greater variety of stuff. They eat more aggressively so that they actually spend more time ruminating, which is what they need to do to actually be productive. And they're on fresh ground every day. They're moved away from the flies, away from yesterday's manure pile, away from the toilet, and they're moved onto fresh ground. And so it's great for the animal, and it enables the grass, the pasture, the photosynthesis to really kick into high gear, and for way more biomass and carbon sequestration development. We call this mob stocking, herbivorous solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization.
You didn't suck that one out of your thumb, did you? I
No,
mean, good
no,
grief.
I spent a while putting that together.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm glad I
uh,
didn't see that earlier. I would have tried to memorize it.
yeah, yeah. But the bottom line is, by doing that, in our county where we are, Augusta County, Virginia, the average cow days, so a cow day is what one cow will eat in a day. So that's a constant. It's like inches to a carpenter, bushels to an apple orchard. A cow day is what one cow will eat in 1 day. In our county, the average cow days per acre is 80. In other words, an acre will support 80 cows for 1 day a year, or one cow for 80 days a year. Are you with me?
Yes.
And
Yes.
we average almost 400 cow days per acre. And we
Wow.
have never planted a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer. So and what this does, there are numerous other things that this does. It enables you to have a mosaic in your pasture, so something is always in bloom. We participated several years ago in a Smithsonian called a working landscape study. We were one of, I think, 29 sites in Virginia that they chose, and we were the only site in Virginia that had all 8 known types of bumblebees in the state. And I think it's because of this mosaic, that by moving them around all the time, you have stuff that's mature, immature, and partly mature, and so there's always something in blossom, and that really stimulates pollinators. We also have 20 hives of honeybees here, and they do very well as well.
Yeah, you got to give those pollinators something to eat, and you're giving the worms something to eat. This whole underground universe that you talk about. Tell our listeners the worm story, Joel. I just love this.
Oh, at the
Hang
school, at the school?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. So I was I do too. So I was out speaking in California, and I went to visit a farm school. It was a little 3 acre farm that was hooked up with the middle schools of that county, and every student in the middle schools went and spent half a day a week at this farm. And they had, vegetables and chickens and all sorts of different things. Well, one of the things they had was a worm box. It was about 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep. It looked like a giant coffin. Okay, like a coffin for an NBA player. All right, so you have this and listen, and kids, Debbie, if you want to see kids get excited, you get them in a worm box. I mean, all these worms. I mean, it's just like a seething mass
Yeah.
of stuff. All right. So yeah. So the teacher said, "All right, kids, we got a homework assignment. Next Monday, bring food." And so the next Monday, they brought gummy bears and Twizzlers and Velveeta squeezable cheese and hot pockets and whatever. And they put that in there, and then the two teachers, the two farm ladies, they put in like a pork chop, a apple, a banana, all right, in their end. So the next week, kids come, they go charge up, they open up the lid, they look in, and here comes the Twizzler, the Kit Kat, the gummy bear, the Velveeta squeezable cheese. They, nothing. And over here on this end, well, there's no apple, there's no banana, there's no pork chop. And the object lesson was, it was so great. The teachers looked at the students and said, "So why would you want to eat something even worms won't eat?" And man, ever since I saw that, that is a fantastic thing. Let me tell you what my permutation is on that. Since the Worcester conference where you saw me speak. So as you know, Maha is really
Yeah.
taking off, and there's all this discussion about ultra processed food and additives and red dye 29, all this stuff. And is it okay? Is it not okay? Glyphosate, whatever, 10,000 food additives in the US, all this stuff. And of course, there's all this wrangling. And of course, the food companies are having a fit about daring to be questioned about, is this stuff okay or not? And so RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy, is struggling to get whatever credible research, to make the case. I mean, in my view, the case has already been made, but he's struggling to make the case that we need to look at some of this stuff, not necessarily to ban it, but not to promote it.
Mhm.
Not to let people spend SNAP money, for Coca-Cola. And so I've had this thought as I've watched his, and I'm a friend or promoter of the Maha movement, and so I'm sitting here thinking, well, my goodness, we don't need to go into a bunch of committee meetings and jet people all over the country and do billion-dollar research studies on this stuff. All we need is a worm farm, and we get 100 worm beds, and we take everything that we put on the soil, on plants, and in our food, okay, and
Yeah.
we submit each one to 1 week with the worms, and and we can do 100 a week. So in a year we could do 5,000. In 2 years we could do 10,000, and we just submit it to the worms, and what the worms like gets a green light. All right, America, this is great. And what the worms don't gets a red light. No, we can't have it. And let the worms vote. The worms don't watch TV. They're not swayed by advertising. They're not swayed by K Street, the lobbyists on K Street. And we just let worms choose our food, our soil amendments, our plant amendments. We just let worms decide, and we'll have a truly. I think that would be the ultimate test to determine if this is what God wants us to use or not.
Amen. I think that's the best. We're going to balance the budget. Think of all the money we're going to save
Oh
on
yeah, yeah,
everything. We're going to save money on healthcare. People are going to have more fun.
yeah.
You talk about if you're going to watch the news, you need to watch something hilarious twice as much time. So people are going to get a lot of entertainment out of this, Joel. It's going to be
Oh,
good.
oh. I mean, you could actually have real time cameras set up,
Yeah,
on each
yeah. Well,
worm bed.
those fat. Remember on the old like National Geographic or whatever, they do those speeded up of the
Yeah, yeah,
flower.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
so we could
Uh-huh.
do that. What's it called? Time lapse
Yeah,
photography of
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
worms eating up or moving away from the squeezable
yeah.
Velveeta, like
Right, right,
running
right.
from it, like
Yeah,
ah.
yeah. That's right. That's right.
That's
Yeah,
so good. Oh, that's so rich.
yeah.
Well, you do bring God into the equation, the creator of everything. You talk about that science has to be observable and reproducible, I believe is how you say it. You're a total wordsmith, but creation is not observable and reproducible. So tell our listeners about, how you view your farm as part of your Christian stewardship.
Sure. So thank you for that question. So essentially, our bottom line is it's not ours. I mean, the psalmist says in the Psalms, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness of it. In other words, this is his. Now the courthouse says we own this piece of property. I get that, but in actuality, we view all the physical universe as owned by God. It's God's stuff. It's ultimately God's stuff. And so that begs the question, well, if my property is really God's, if the trees are God's, if the chickens are God's, if the cows are God's, if the tomatoes are God's, if the soil is God's, if the water is God's, if it's his stuff, well, does he care? Does he care what I do with it? Does he care how I take care of it? I mean, what that means is I'm actually not an owner. I'm a steward for the owner. All right. And what is the first thing that an owner wants from a steward? Well, number one, they don't want it to go backwards. They don't want it to become whatever, less productive or less healthy. That's number one. And number two, most of them want some sort of a return on their investment. We call that an ROI in business, return on investment. Well, you know, if I were God and this earth were mine, and I'm looking down and thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't make these deserts. I didn't make a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't make Superfund sites. I didn't, I mean, I can go down the list, but you see what
Right.
if that was what I saw, I'd say, hey, somebody got in my stuff and messed it up. That would be my reaction. And so that's the way we view our responsibility. And and it's a wonderful responsibility. I mean, I view it like, well, he could take care of this with angels. He could take care of it with, the voice of his mouth. He could do whatever, but he chose me. He
Yeah.
chose me,
Yeah.
Debbie, to go out here and be his hands and feet and
Yeah.
interact and massage and caress this object lesson of his divine attributes. And so for us, the bottom line is, when somebody leaves the farm, we want them to say, "Oh, that's what mercy looks like. Oh, that's what peace looks like. Oh, that's what abundance and provision look like." Because we view the physical world as an object lesson of spiritual truth. You can't just sit in a focus group and talk about mercy and forgiveness and abundance without visceral stuff to hang it on. Just like, love is not something that can be done without an object. Well, who do you love? What do you love? How do you love, right? I mean, there's all these things. And it's the same way with mercy and forgiveness and redemption and abundance and provision and all those things, um, are 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 nebulous. They're nothing without some sort of a framework to hang them on. So this is why we talk about, we want to provide a habitat in which the pigs can express their pigness. We want to honor the pigness of the pig. Why? Well, because when we honor the pigness of the pig, we honor the godness of God. If we don't care about the pigness of the pig, then the next thing is, we're not going to care about the holiness of God or the mercy of God or the forgiveness of God. And so I think even in our homes and with our kids and whatever, we can talk about these pretty heady issues if we have a physical reference point. And so we see everything through that prism. And I'll just mention one more because I think it's so profound. The whole notion that we can produce life without death. And this is a big one right now with the animal
This is,
welfare movement and
yeah.
all this
Yeah.
stuff. And Debbie, it's foundational to the entire chemical fertilizer industry, that, oh, nothing has to decompose. We don't have to feed soil by something that was living, died, decomposed, and is now regenerated in a new form like compost. No, we can just pump chemicals and put them on the soil, and nothing has to die in order for something to live. And that's the biggest lie ever. Everything is eating and being eaten. And if you want to live, you actually die. And of course, we know
Right.
in Christ,
Right.
his death provided life for
Right.
us. And I tell kids when I speak at elementary school stuff, if you really want to live, you die to yourself. You serve
Yes.
others, and
Yeah.
that's how you actually live. And
Yeah.
so this whole idea that, oh, we're not going to kill animals anymore, we're going to be able to use chemicals to grow all of our own food and all that, it is a complete mockery of one of the most profound ecological, I would say spiritual object
Mhm.
lessons through ecology that we can imagine.
I totally agree. We are trying to negate the design in every way, whether it's the food we eat, how we treat the soil, how we treat the animals, how we view our possessions. We have to live in harmony with God's design to be happy. I mean,
Yeah.
to feel fulfilled. And I don't know if the happy is exactly the right word, Joel, but you know what I'm saying.
To be I would just say to flourish,
To flourish.
or be functional. I mean, boy, we saw this really happen when you know 50 years ago, when all the agriculture experts around the world were telling us farmers to feed dead cows to our cows. This is you can grow cow you can grow cows cheaper this way. We'll grind up dead cows and feed them back to cows. And farmers like me that were thinking about these things looked at that and said, wait a minute, where on the planet does an herbivore eat meat, eat carrion? Well, it doesn't exist. It absolutely doesn't exist. And so we didn't buy into it. And we were, of course, accused of being Luddites, barbarians, anti-science. Don't you want to make progress? Blah blah blah. Cavemen, Neanderthals, and we didn't do it. Not for any of those reasons. We didn't do it because we couldn't see a God-ordered pattern
Yeah.
in which this made sense. Now, it took 30 years until, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow,
Mm-hmm.
actually, reared its ugly head. That's how forgiving nature is. You can abuse it a lot and
Mm-hmm.
it'll still come on.
Mm-hmm.
But 30 years later, of course, we had, mad cow, and and what we had done is we had pierced that order with chaos.
Yeah.
And that's what God brought to the universe. Genesis 1:1, he moved upon the face of the earth, the water, and brought order out of chaos. And so anything that stimulates chaos, you can be assured is not divinely requested, which genetically modified organisms is another example.
Right.
You can't have a being that's part tomato, part fish, and part persimmon. In Genesis 1:1, he says, I'm going to make everything produce seed after its own kind. GMO, they're patented sterile, so they don't even produce seed. And B, if they did, they don't produce it after any kind. It's complete chaos. And God actually set up lots of boundaries so that couldn't be done. And we are just, like swashbuckling pirates walking into this sacred space and arrogating to ourselves manipulative capacity that God never ordained us to have.
Mm-hmm. And then wondering why we're sick.
Yeah, and then wondering
Yeah.
why we're sick, or why it doesn't work, or why this plant is more susceptible to frost, or more susceptible to bugs, or doesn't have nutrient density in it. Any number of things.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking, "Oh my gosh, the Salatins are doing it, but could we do it?" So I want to assure the listeners that there's a huge opportunity here for anybody who wants to just start small
Yes.
and have their own little regenerative farm. So Joel, talk about that, because you mentioned at the conference that many of the current farmers are aging out.
Yes.
And right at the same time as you work with RFK and, people, there are initiatives that are changing people's minds. So this is a huge opportunity.
Well, it is. And yeah, the average American farmer right now is 60 years old. And if you look at business, rules of business, anytime an economic sector in a culture, the average practitioner is more than 35, that is considered a sector in jeopardy. It's in decline. Well, farming is now at 60. And so in the next 15, that's 15 years, half of all America's agriculture equity is going to change hands. That's all the land, all the equipment, all the buildings. Half of it. No culture, no civilization has ever weathered that degree of agrarian transfer without conquest. The Huns come in and take over Rome or whatever. It's. I'm not saying we're getting ready to be conquested. Maybe we are or not. But the point is, it's never happened in peacetime. So we have a big order on our plate right now to take the aging farmer and create a new generation of land stewards to take this and protect it from all going to Bill Gates, BlackRock, and Vanguard, or the Chinese or whatever. And so that's why I'm on a bit of a a bit of a tear to try to encourage, inspire, and coach, push a new generation of young people to jump on this as an opportunity, as a unprecedented opportunity to not only heal the land that's been abused for a long time, but then to access the marketplace that is leaving Monsanto in droves. And everything that RFK Jr. uncovers in the food system is making people distrust it more. And so I've never seen such a whatever a stampede, if you will, a market stampede for non-industrial food. And goodness, it's a stampede whose time has come, and I'm just thrilled to see it happen and hope that it builds up speed. But yeah, there's an unprecedented opportunity to make this happen.
Well, and people don't need a lot of land. You mentioned they could start with 5 acres. Also, though, Joel, I know your time's coming to an end, but just briefly tell our listeners how you and Teresa got started. Because when you started on the land, it was rocks when you were a little kid. But
Yeah.
moving forward, so folks, you don't need this lush piece of land. If you look at the Polyface website now, it's the Garden of Eden. But it didn't start that way, right?
No, no, it sure didn't. I mean, I remember as a kid. So mom and dad bought this property in 1961. We've now added two more properties to it, but when it started in 1961, it was a rock pile, gullied rock pile that you couldn't grow hardly 15 cows, and today it does over 100, and you know when I was a kid, I can remember as a kid walking the whole farm and never setting foot on a piece of vegetation. The ground was that bare. You could walk between the clumps, stuff. And today, of course, it's just solid lush green mat. And so, it didn't change overnight. And if we had known then what we know now, we could have changed it faster for sure. But we started doing multi-species, the controlled grazing, started doing large scale composting. We got a wood chipper so we could put a carbonaceous diaper under the animals in the wintertime and compost that. Then we use pigs to do the aerating. And now, it's gone from the armpit of the community to arguably the most lush place in the community. I'm not bragging. I'm giving humble homage to
Yeah.
these patterns work. I'm not out here inventing something. These all we did was we said, well, how did God order this? And we're just trying to mimic that on a domestic scale using our intellect and our mechanical hosing thumbs, and bring that to the landscape. And yeah, you're right. You don't need a lot of land to get a toehold. And I'm a big fan of actually starting on land that you don't own. Just go ahead and start. We're big fans of the portable farm. And
Uh-huh.
Debbie, I've written 16 books. Number
Uh-huh.
17 is coming out in October. And some of these are broad cultural books like the Folks This Ain't Normal one, but most of them are hardcore
Yeah.
how
Right.
to grow chickens, how to grow beef, how to set up a farm, how to set up a farm business, how to have a family friendly business where it's successionally friendly. Fields of Farmers, how to develop risk sharing partnerships. So there's 22 of us now who earn a living from the farm, but nobody is paid hourly. It's either salary or subcontract or some sort of performance oriented
Mhm.
compensation. So everybody shares a little bit of risk, and that creates stakeholder ownership in the whole program. So now we're going down a rabbit hole there, but trust me, the business elements are as important and necessary as the actual, how do we build organic matter in the soil? How do we grow, abundant crops? How do we grow abundant food and have healthy animals and really functional immune systems? That's all part of it, but it's also, you got to watch your money and your marketing and your finances, and somebody's got to, balance the checkbook.
Well, you have to use the brain God gave you, and you're doing that. I mean, You're loving God, loving people, and you're keeping it relational. That's the thing I would want our listeners to know about Polyface Farms and the Salatin family. It's relational. It's not transactional. So much in our world has gotten transactional, and we just applaud what you're doing. We want to mimic what you're doing. You have lots and lots of education for people who
Mhm.
who
Yep.
want to know, who even just want to start low, go slow in a little bitty farm. So, how can people find you, Joel? How can they order
Yeah.
your meat products? It's not just meat, but tell us everything.
Yeah. So I do a blog.
It's
So
great, you guys. When you need that entertainment, just go to the blog. It's wonderful.
it's musings from the Lunatic Farmer, and I try to keep them all readable under 5 minutes with a question at the end, and to stimulate ideas and conversation. I do a weekly podcast with Dr. Sina McCullough called Beyond Labels. We have video curriculum. Like I say, I've written a lot of books. We ship nationwide. You can get beef, pork, chicken, eggs, turkey for Thanksgiving from us, and we'll be glad to get it to your doorstep. But we do seminars. We do all sorts of wellness and farming and parallel universe type thing. Opt out of the system type things. And so, but it's all available on our website, Polyface Farms, Polyface, polyfacefarms.com. I don't have a personal social media presence. Everything is through the farm because I don't have a smartphone, and I don't want to spend time fooling around with all that social media. But if you want a clever T-shirt like compost the bureaucrats, or everything I want to do is illegal, or the Food Emancipation Proclamation, those kinds of things. We have a gift shop too, and we have all sorts of swag there as well. So polyfacefarms.com.
Oh, thank you, Joel. This has just been such an honor to have time with you. And thank you, listeners. Thank you for sharing. Send this podcast to somebody who likes to eat good food. It's going to do so many things for their immune system just to have the wit of Joel Salatin. We're now in, I think, about 150 countries and maybe 5,500 cities for Vitality Made Simple. And that's because you listeners are sharing and subscribing. And just thanks for joining me. Blessings until next time.
Thanks for joining us on Vitality Made Simple podcast. Be sure to visit drdebbieosment.com for our courses and resources designed to help you feel better, look better, and enjoy better relationships. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for joining us.